It's recording now. So if you want to say your name and give an introduction, there's no, as I tell everybody, there's no right or wrong with introductions. You can give the 30-second elevator spiel, or you can go a 5 or 10-minute monologue, whatever you want to say about yourself. This is your chance.
Oh, my name is Julianna Mason, and I hail from the great state of Minnesota. I am a psychic medium. I have been documented since I was 4 years old, and I'm a professional paranormal investigator. My team and I have our hands in a lot of areas of paranormal and supernatural phenomena. And, oh my goodness, I'm just an average everyday person that communicates with the dead.
Okay, so you're a psychic medium. That's the part that going to catch everybody. So what's the difference between a psychic medium and like a channeler?
Well, a medium will more than likely, I don't want to say hear things, but you get a sense that someone is talking to you, as though somebody is speaking. They're standing behind you, whispering to you. A channeling, which is something that I have done since I was a little kid as well, is when you invite the entity to actually use your voice to communicate. It's not necessarily possession. It's not like that. It can't possess you. Nothing can possess you unless you choose to let that happen, or somehow, you're in a fragile state and you can take advantage. But difference is that you invite the spirit to use your voice to communicate, as opposed to whispering behind you and then you speaking. So during a channeling, oftentimes the hand gestures, the voice may change, the pitch and the tone of the language. They might use different words or terms than the individual is typically used to using. Whereas with medium, when you're a medium and you're communicating, you're saying, okay, so Joe's behind me and he's saying this, that, and the other thing.
I got it. So I've been to channelers more than once. I don't think I've ever been to a medium, but I couldn't say for certain. I've been to, people who read tarot cards. I've been around just friends, associates that read tarot. There was this girl I used to hang out with. We used to do, you know who Robert Monroe is, right?
I might. It doesn't ring a bell at this point.
Okay, so do you know what hemisync music is?
I'm sorry, repeat that.
Do you know what hemispheric synchronization is? Synchronization is?
No, I've never heard that term.
Okay, so you have two halves of your brain. You've got left brain and right brain. They're really separate brains, and they talk to each other through the corpus callosum. But they're really not one brain. They're two independent brains. And when you get into higher mind states, the two become synchronized and function together as one brain. But as they sit now, they're really two brains talking to each other. There are some people who have no corpus callosum, and so they can't even talk to each other. They still function just fine, but the two halves just don't talk to each other. But the person functions fine. And so anyway, if you do laying on of hands, if you do channeling of chi energy, if you do hemispheric synchronization, music, there are many ways you can sync the two sides of your brain into higher mind states. I'm guessing that the 40 hertz mind state, okay, you know the normal mind states people think, the frequencies people talk about, normal waking is beta, relaxed is alpha, more relaxed is theta, and sleep is delta, or dreaming. And those are the ones that everybody knows about, right? But the ones that people forget about or don't know about, above beta, there's gamma. And beta is in the 22 megahertz, I think. And gamma is in 40 megahertz, I think, something like that, 40 hertz, whatever. It's what they call the no mind state. When you a long time ago, before I got into meditation, I was at a New Age, this house where they had all kinds of New Age ceremonies, and this lady, I was just like passing in the hallway or something, and I don't even remember the context of what we were saying, but we stopped and started talking to each other about meditation, and she said, most meditation, you go down to where you're at beta, you go to alpha, and you incorporate theta and delta. And a lot of meditators still get to the point where they're in a normal waking state, but they're also got theta and delta frequencies in their mind at the same time as they're awake. So they don't have to sleep because they've got all the frequencies going. So they never have to sleep. There's a guy, a guru I used to go be a disciple of, and I went to check him out in San Antonio, and I stopped at this lady's house, and she showed us videos of her guru. He'd already passed on, he was no longer alive, but when he was alive, he was a Mongolian, and he was also albino. So that's like an unbelievably rare combination. In America, they're very rare to ever come across a Mongolian person, and then albino is even rarer. But anyway, so what was I saying? What were we talking about? Mind states. Oh yeah, so he would be up talking in front of a crowd, and he would close his eyes, and you would see his eyes going back and forth, left to right, and it looked like he was in REM sleep, but she said, "Do you know what he's doing?" And I said, "No, I have no idea what he's doing." And she said, "He's working on the energy bodies of the people in the crowd, and he's changing them through his power." And then he had a microphone on, a redundant lapel microphone, and it fell off of his tie or shirt or whatever it was connected to, and he was trying to put it back on, and he was struggling. He couldn't put it back on, and she said, "Do you realize why he can't put his microphone back on? Why he's struggling with that?" I said, "No." She said, "Because his mind, he's not seeing the physical world. He's seeing the energetic world only. He's not seeing the physical world at all. He's only like in the Matrix. I don't know if you saw the movie The Matrix, but he's literally only seeing the energetic world. He's not seeing the physical world. And when he's looking at these people, before he even closes his eyes, he's only seeing their energy body. He's not seeing the physical body." And I had no clue what this guy. I didn't even know there was such a mind state. I was totally skeptical. And then many years later, like 10 years later, I was at a MUFON meeting. And after the meeting, I walked out of the meeting and sat on I flipped the bed of my truck down, a little Toyota pickup, and I sat in the bed, and this girl had walked out with me, and she was an abductee, and I'm a contactee, and we were like talking, and she's like, she tells me that they had this New Age metaphysical training, and what they told them to do was get close to each other and relax, sit down in a chair real close to, pull the chairs up next to each other where their knees are almost touching, and they're looking at each other's eyes, and each person is sending the message, "You are perfect, you are Christ consciousness. You are absolute. You're giving the other person the energy or the information that they are absolutely perfect, and they were giving that to each other at the same time, passing it back and forth. They're doing this towards each other at the same time. And she said after doing that for a little while, her third eye opened, and all of a sudden she could only see the energetic body of everybody. She couldn't see the physical world. So she confirmed that the mind state the other lady was talking about was a real mind state. I got that confirmed finally. Anyway, it was the reason why I went off on that tangent. What were we talking about before? I lost my tangent because my wife walked in here to get my dog, and I kind of lost my train of thought and went off on a tangent. But what were we talking about just before? The last thing we mentioned, let's see, there's channeling and medium. And oh, well, I got a question for you. So right off the bat, so have you ever had your higher self speak through you that you remember?
I'm sure I have.
But you don't remember it specifically.
No.
Okay, let me give you one of mine. I've only had it happen once or twice, and I only remember it one time for sure. I was in a anger management class that I had to go through because of some issues I had with my wife. It was at a church, and we're just in a group talking about various different topics about the problems each person was having. We're all sitting in a circle, and every person in the group except for the leader and his wife were all there because the law said you got to be there to manage your anger. So anyway, there was a point where I was talking to a fellow, and I started saying things about him that my conscious mind didn't know. And
That's happened to me.
yeah, that's your higher self talking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of rare, and you don't ever hear anybody but it's saying, well, we're going to train you to allow your higher self to talk through you. You don't, I've heard of all kinds of metaphysical classes, but I've never heard of that one. But you think they'd have something like that, train you to allow your higher self to speak through you all the time, something like that. That'd be pretty cool.
When I do psychic readings for people, that'll often happen. I quite often don't remember the sessions. Same thing with.
Say it again. The audio dropped. You said something. The audio dropped.
That'll happen typically when I'm doing psychic readings for people. I often don't recall the sessions, and it's the same thing with channeling. As I connect with the ethereal, I don't usually recall. So recording has been beneficial because I can go back and listen to it, and it's kind of like a little surprise because I don't remember what
So
happened.
you do paid private sessions of some kind, right?
Yep.
Okay, so tell the audience, you can do this again at the end when we get through. Tell the audience how to reach you so that, let's say they want to get a reading right this very moment. How would they reach you? How many all the different ways they can reach you?
Well, we can be reached at our official website, which is PIAC, Minnesota Paranormal. And we also have our company cell phone number, which is 952-855-8887. They can leave a text message. If they log on to the Media Manual podcast, they can leave a voice comment and contact us that way, which I have been contacted by a couple of people through the podcast. You can get messages to us there. And we have a couple of email addresses, preferably Julianna Mason at paranormalinvestigations.co, not com. It's just .co. So there are quite a few ways to get a hold of us.
And what's the easiest way?
The cell phone, 952-855-8887.
Okay, so Now that half the country's going to call you, just kidding. Uh, um, where do we go from here? So, um, tell us the very first interesting or strange thing that ever happened to you in your life. Anything that you would consider have been odd of in any shape or form ever.
Well, I would have to say my mom was very psychic in her own right, and her and I shared a lot of experiences. We lived in a ground zero for UFO activity when I was a little girl,
Where?
and so even as long as
Where?
I could walk,
Where?
we grew up. I grew up in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, but at the time it was nothing but forest and farm field. There were only 5 homes in the entire area, and they were all separated by woods and farm fields. And we had just all the time, we had ball lightning, we had beings walking around in the yard, we had craft come over the house routinely, just really bizarre. And I think that I remember almost
How many
earlier than I would the working with the dead.
how many times have you seen ball lightning?
I've seen ball lightning twice, and it was both times when I was a kid at that house.
I've seen it once. It was I was traveling across Houston, and it was one of the strangest things I've ever seen. It was basically, I don't know if what I saw was the same as what you saw, but it looked like an hourglass of of um, of clouds. So it looked like a cloud shaped in the shape of an hourglass that was ginormous, right? But the edge of the hourglass was absolutely perfectly shaped, and um, at the bottom it was very wide, and at the top it was very wide, and in the center it came down to a point right in the middle where the hourglass would you know would meet, except you couldn't see the center because that was where the ball lightning was, and you could see it was just a whole bunch. It was just a big cloud with lightning coming out of it and going back into it, and it was just a ball of lightning that was, the light was going in and out of the ball in the cloud, or this ball cloud in the middle, and then the hourglass was beyond that, going up into the sky and down to the ground, and you couldn't really see the bottom or the top of the cloud very well. But the hourglass itself was oddly perfectly shaped, and I was all feeding into or out of this ball of lightning, and it stayed together like that and moved slowly across the sky, like above the highway behind where I was riding with a guy in a car, and I was the passenger, and it was coming behind us, and it was going straight, like following us all the way across the city. It was really bizarre. Anyway, so you didn't give me an event. You gave me a whole bunch of little tidbits of things that you experienced. So which event, give me an event, the first event that happened to you.
Oh, well, I was playing in my room when I was about 5, and a little boy appeared in my room, and he was standing by the window, and he was looking out the window, and I said, "Hey, who are you?" He said, "Oh, my name is Pete." And I'm like, "Okay, uh, how did you get in here?" And he said, "I've always been here. I live here. My mom went to the hospital." And he just kept repeating this loop. Uh, and he was as real as I am. And he only appeared to me and only in the bedroom. And I was about 5 when I first saw him. And I would say that was pretty bizarre when they started appearing to me. And there were other spirits in the house too, but they appeared to my mom as well. But for some reason, he only appeared to me. And living where we did, where there was nobody, it was uh, it was kind of interesting. He apparently believed he lived in a farmhouse, and our home was an old farmhouse. And his mom was in the hospital. Mom went to the hospital, and that's why he was at the window. He was very worried. And I wasn't afraid. I knew not to be afraid. I didn't find any reason to be afraid. And I think that's kind of what might set me apart from other people that work with the dead, because I've never, in situations where I should be afraid, I'm not. They don't really scare me.
So,
So it was
so,
unusual, but
so when you saw him as a 5-year-old, did you ever realize he was dead the whole time you were talking to him?
yeah, what a 5-year-old would understand dead to be. I knew that he wasn't, that he was a person, but not like us. And as I grew up, looking back over the years, I kind of wondered if maybe he was actually an ET, because he would appear, and it would happen around the time that we would have craft come over the house, or we would see anomalies in the yard and things like that. So I kind of wondered. And for me, sometimes it's difficult to decipher between ET and spirit. Well, ethereal. Spirits of the dead, of dead humans, is different than the ethereals, uh, because they are so much alike, and they kind of walk in the same kind of dimensions. But I've often wondered if maybe he was more ET than spirit, and maybe he was just, his shtick and his appearance was just to make sure I wasn't terrified.
So take me back to the moment, or a moment, you saw him as the 5-year-old. You claim that you realized he was dead at that, when, as you were 5 years old, not looking back, but when you were 5, you realized at some moment that he was dead. So in your mind, what did you even understand death to be?
I didn't. I just knew that he was there, but in a different way. And
You
my
just knew he
dad,
wasn't like the rest of us.
right, right. He was a person, but not like us. He didn't have to
Okay.
eat. He didn't have to sleep.
So take us to the next event in your life
Jeez.
after the dead boy.
Oh,
Oh, before you do that, uh, was there any evolution of experience with the dead boy? Did he tell you anything? Did anything change from the first moment you met him till the last moment you met him? Did anything evolve or change, or did he tell you anything new, or did anything, like from the very first moment you met him to the very last time you saw him, was there any evolution in your relationship of any kind?
no.
Time is the moment. Okay, or take us to the next event that happened in your life.
The next encounter I had was there was an entity in the house that would appear. We had my dad, Fred, came from the deep south, and had a family Bible that was as big as a Buick, and we kept it under the coffee table because it was so big. My grandmother had handwritten in it and stuff, and it had these beautiful, beautiful, uh, you know, pages and pages of these religious prints. And I would spend a lot of time by myself looking at these pictures. Well, there was a spirit that kept appearing to me in the form of Jesus. he would sit down across from me and he would talk to me without moving his mouth, and we would just chitter chatter about stuff. He would tell me what to write on the paper because I doodled a lot. And he'd say, "Well, draw a heart or draw a butterfly," and he would talk to me. And that's when my mom came out of another room one day and she asked me, she says, "Who are you talking to?" And I said, "I'm talking to the man sitting there." She says, "What man?" I said, "That man, the man there." She said, I don't know what you're talking about." I said, "The man from the book, Mom." And I went over and I pulled out the Bible and I brought up a picture of Jesus. And that's when she called a psychic at that time. And I was a kid in the 60s. And she apparently she had been watching and she knew the experiences that I was having and that I was sharing these experiences with her, but she never revealed that to me until that one day when her and I were by ourselves and he was talking to me as clear as day across the table. And she called up the psychic, and the psychic came over and one afternoon, and I spent 25 years apprenticing with that psychic and learning from her, and getting a grasp of what was happening to me and what to do with it.
What was her name?
Her name was Sandra Rosen. Sandra Rosen.
So what city again were you in? Minnesota?
I lived in Brooklyn Park.
Brooklyn Park.
Yep.
And where is that in the state of Minnesota? Where is that?
It's north of the Twin Cities, and the Twin Cities are in the southeastern corner of Minnesota.
Southeastern corner, just north of the Twin Cities. Brooklyn Park.
Yep.
Okay. You might want to move that microphone a little closer to your mouth if you can, because your voice. It's like half of what you said is perfectly clear, and the other half kind of, it's like it fades out or something. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but anyway, all right, take us to the next. Let's see, the little boy, and what did the psychic say about Jesus? That's something that people are going to kill me if I don't ask you that question.
Well, she felt, and I have to agree with her, that it wasn't necessarily Jesus. I believe that it was another spirit that was inhabiting that land, that house, and chose to appear to me in that form because it was familiar to me and I wouldn't be frightened. And that happens quite often with spirits that want to communicate. They will manifest themselves into a form, oftentimes a relative or a friend or some friendly form, so as not to scare you, especially when you're a kid.
All right. So take us to the next. Before I ask you the next question, what is your time limit today?
What time is it here? 6:15?
It's 7:15 here, or 7:18.
Oh, okay. 15, 30 minutes more maybe?
Oh, really?
Unless you need more time than that.
Well, I mean, I don't have a limit. I'm just asking what if you have a limit, if you have a reason you need to go or something like that. We can always have another talk later. I don't really have a limit personally, but if you have something you need to take care of, we can always stop whenever you're ready. What time would you like to stop?
No later than 8.
Okay, that sounds great. So 8, my time is 41 minutes from now.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. So take us to the next event in your life.
That's really hard to say because things happen all the time and they happen without warning and throughout the day. There's always something going on.
So, okay, so I'll hold that thought. So then in that case, you do have contact with ETs, right?
Yes, I believe I do.
So take us to the first ET experience you had,
Oh,
where you had your first contact with ETs.
oh my goodness. I think my first direct contact would have been in the early 90s. Uh, my then husband and I lived in Rhode Island, and we were lying in bed, sleeping, and all of a sudden there was I was awakened by a bright, bright light flashing in my face. And I woke up and I looked around, and there were bright lights flashing all over the house, but there was no source, no rational source for the lights. It was in the middle of the night. It was a small community. Everybody was asleep. And I went to look out the back window to see if maybe it was, emergency vehicles or something like that flashing at the house behind us or whatever. And the lights were flashing all over the yard. But when I went to kind of peek through the blinds on the window, the blinds started slamming themselves against the window so hard that it freaked my dog out. My husband jumped out of bed. He's telling me, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" I said, "I'm not doing anything. I'm not touching the window." And the lights got so bright that we had to avert our eyes. And they just got closer and closer and closer and closer to the house, and they just filled the house with this blinding, painful light. And things were shaking, and the mini blinds were slamming against the window and slamming against the window, and it lasted 35 seconds, and then bam, it was gone. And there was a temperature shift in the room as well. It got super warm in the room, and just the very second that it stopped, everything got quiet and dark, and the temperature dropped in the room. And that's not typical spirit activity. And I've had other experiences with that since then. I've had more really kind of unsettling ET experiences, and they seem to be getting more and more intense uh, as time moves on.
So over the years, did you ever come to understand who or what that first encounter was? Have you ever come to any knowledge about who or what that was?
I did ask around the neighborhood, and everyone thought I'd lost my mind. Nobody saw or heard a thing. And
That's that's normal.
It's over everybody's house. I mean, come on, people, let's deal with this here. And nobody saw anything. I knew right away it was ET, and I don't know how. I just knew in my gut that it was ET. It was about another 10 years when I had the next experience that I actually did a podcast about it. I've seen ETs throughout my life. You see them in the sky, and you see things out of the corner of your eye, and you know that it's not of this world. But in the early 2000s, I was home alone getting ready to go to work. And I had an old boombox, and the boombox was it was on. I had it on in the living room, and I was doing my hair in the bathroom down the hallway. And all of a sudden, I heard these strange noises coming from the boombox while I was in the bathroom. And I went out, and it was flipping itself through the stations. So I unplugged it. I turned it off first, went back in the bathroom, started playing again. So I unplugged it, went back to the bathroom, started playing again. And it started making these shrieking noises, like really loud, just tone type of noises that were really painful and uncomfortable. So I thought, well, maybe it's the battery. So I pulled the batteries out, and I'll be damned if that thing didn't continue going off. And so I had it unplugged, turned off, the battery's out, and it's screeching at me. And it's making all kinds of horrendous noise. And the room filled with this noise. And I noticed that there was leaves being stirred up outside the window. And I go to the window and I lift up the curtain, and standing out there is this being. He was super, 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 super tall, and he looked like liquid black vinyl. And he had, like 2 legs and 2 arms and a head. But he was like flowing, like he was made of black vinyl. He was super shiny and pliable. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I screamed, and he turned himself around. And when he turned himself around, and he wasn't facing me full face, he was sideways. He almost disappeared. He was so thin. And he shot down, because I lived on the beach. He shot down to the sand and into Lake Michigan. And when he did, he kicked up a whole swirl of these leaves that had piled up outside the door. And I ran out the window, and I ran out the door. And when I looked down at where he was standing at the window, there was a perfect circle of leaves swirling, and it had completely cleared. This was not a sloppy circle. This was like somebody took time to make this circle and clear a circular space on the concrete. And the leaves were just kind of swirling around, and there was a perfect line all the way down to the beach and through the sand, and you could see it where he took off. And I feel terrible that I screamed, because if I hadn't screamed, I was, who knows what would have transpired. But just in the last, I'd say 10 months, I had what was the most alarming ET experience that I recall. And it still kind of shakes me up today. I work with dead people, ethereals. ETs are kind of out of my range. But I've had so much, I don't want to say contact, but interaction or experience with them. But a pair of them showed up in my house about 10 months ago while we were sleeping. And I was awakened by a bright light, and it was like somebody was taking pictures with a flash bulb outside the bedroom window. And it was hurting my face. And Douglas didn't wake up, and the dog didn't wake up. And so I rolled over to get away from it. And all of a sudden it was flashing in my face. And when I sat up and I opened my eyes, there were two beings standing next to me by my bed. And they were kind of a pasty, whitish, I don't know, kind of like plaster of Paris kind of look to them. And it looked like they were struggling to manifest themselves in human form, but they were not doing it very well at all. And I said, I don't know who you are, but you're not my mom, you're not my sister. I don't know who you are. What are you doing here? What are you doing here? And they apparently didn't realize I could see them. And they kind of shot out of the room. So I shot out of the room after them, and they were nowhere to be found. But they did something to the house, because I couldn't get noise out of my mouth. And when I would touch anything, it was like I was inside a big thick bubble, and I was pressing it, and I couldn't touch anything because this bubble was there. And I got real scared, and I went back into the bedroom, and I jumped on the bed, and I was trying to wake up the dog and trying to wake up Douglas, and I couldn't touch them. It was like this bubble of energy was around me, and it was preventing me from getting my hands on Douglas and waking him up. And I was screaming at him and the dog, and I was jumping on the bed, and I was trying to reach for them, and this energy was between me and him, and I couldn't touch him. And I was in this panic, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to have to lay back down and go to sleep, and I'll snap out of it and I'll wake up. And I laid down in bed, and it was really cold. It got really cold in there for some reason. And I closed my eyes, and I just laid there till I fell back to sleep. And then when I woke up, everything was fine. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know why they were there. But I definitely think they have some connection to that very first contact I had in the early 90s in Rhode Island because of that flashing light, that painful flashing light. I had another experience too, where they actually came into physical contact with me, and I was paralyzed to the bed, and I couldn't breathe, I couldn't scream, I couldn't blink. They came in through the window, and they had this like line of energy. I don't know what kind of energy beam it was, but it was buzzing so loud in my ears it almost broke my eardrums, and it just went right over me like this, and kind of stopped here for a second and then continued going over me. And then it just shot out the window and it left. And I was in mid scream when it had come through the window. So as it left the window, this the scream came out of my mouth that I couldn't get out before because they had paralyzed me. And I jumped up and I ran into the bathroom, and my skin was burned up on fire. And I had these strange triangles on my face, like burn mark triangles on my face. And I picked up the phone and I called a friend of mine who was very, very enthusiastic about ETs and very knowledgeable. And he came right over, and he was freaking out. He's like, oh my God, we got to call these people. We got to do this. We got to do that because you made contact. And I said, no, I said, the husband will kill me. Don't do that. But it took about a year for those marks to just like diminish significantly.
Did you get photos?
No, this was in the early 2000s. You know, phones didn't have a lot going on, and I didn't think about getting photos, unfortunately. But my skin was definitely burned. And you could see like this side of my face and down into my neck was like I had fallen asleep in the sun. And then the marks were on my cheek here.
You said triangles?
Yeah, they kind of look like triangle shaped burn marks. Not like perfectly triangular, but you could definitely look at it and say, oh, that looks like a triangle. So I've had some definite experiences with them. And I kind of, because that's not part of my paranormal repertoire, because I don't work with ETs, at least I don't think I do, but it is terrifying. And I would love to know what the Black Vinyl Man was. I know a friend of mine who's also one of my colleagues, and she works behind the scenes with my paranormal team. She's been a teacher and a mentor, and she works with UFO abductees. And
hold on, hold that thought. So your friend, you can't give out her name, right?
Oh, my friend that I said works with, that has done some healing with abductees.
Yeah.
Her name is Bev Hines. Excuse me. Her name is Bev Hines, and she lives in Michigan, in Traverse City, Michigan. She's a very private person, but if you wanted to talk with her about her ET experiences, I'm sure she would love to connect with you. She's a healer and a teacher. She's one of the dearest people in my entire life. I could never, I don't know what to do if anything ever happened to her. And
Well,
she's our ET expert.
If she wants to be on my show, I'd definitely like to have her on the show. So.
Oh gosh, yes, I will tell her about that and see if she would be interested. I don't see why she wouldn't. she loves healing and talking to people about it, and she's my go-to for ETs
Well,
when these experiences take place.
I'm going to suggest to her that she suggests to her abductee clients that if they have not gone public, or even if they have, either way, they can also be on the show. But it's all, I don't push anybody to go public that doesn't want to go. If they want, fine. If they don't, fine. This is a public thing, but they want to stay private in the shadows. I mean, I did that myself. I had people want me to go public for much of my life, and I never would do that. And then finally, I just decided to do it. And it wasn't that long ago. It was only less than 3 years ago that I finally went public. But I don't normally promote other people's stuff, but I want to show you something so that, do you read?
Oh yeah. I read a lot.
So
and I
you
listen to audiobooks a lot too.
you bought books through Amazon, right?
Through Amazon, and I have Audible for audiobooks.
Okay, so but I mean you bought books through Amazon, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, so here's a book. Let me know if you can see it properly. Uh,
The Gift from the Stars, Alien Races. Stars, Alien Races.
can you read the subtitle in the middle?
Extraterrestrial Contacts and Guide of Alien Races. That's on Amazon. I can find that on Amazon.
Yeah, the name is Elena Denon, and I've never done this. I've never promoted anybody's book in my whole life, but except for my own. Her name is ELENA DANAAN. Elena Denon, and her last name has 3 A's. Her first name has 2 E's and an A.
Okay.
Elena Denon. So that book, I have another book which I'm not going to promote that has a bunch of ETs, supposedly a bunch of ETs in there. I like hers better because it's an actual bound book. The other one is more of a pamphlet. But that book has, I don't know, I'd have to look into it. I think it's like over 100 races that they go over, that she goes over, that are contacting Earth at this time. So, in some fashion. And some of them, they're not contacting Earth, but they kind of fit in somehow. They're connected in some way. But if you want to, if you've had contact and you want to know who it was, there's 2 ways to figure that out. One way is I put you in a trance and take you back and you figure it out. That's probably would work if you're brave enough to go back to that moment in time. The other, if you're not, the other option is you find a book that shows that race and you go, oh, that's them, And so her book it doesn't just talk about aliens, it has very, very good drawings of them also. So if you have any beings that you've contacted, it's a possibility that they're in the book. I'd be willing to bet there's a lot more than 100 contacting Earth at this time, but that's the ones that were given in the book. So one of your races, I don't know how many races would you say you've had contact with so far?
2 that I could identify, which would be the pasty guys from my bedroom,
right,
and Black Vinyl Man.
Okay, so I suspect that Black Vinyl Man might not be in her book, but he could be. But there's nobody that I remember called Black Vinyl Man. But
I don't know what else to call them.
The pasty guys, now those guys are very likely to be in the book. So if you want to know who the pasty guys are, that book is probably your best bet, other than getting regressed. So if you want to get regressed and find out who each of those 2 races are, we can do that. You just have to tell me you want to do that, and we'll take care of it. And as long as you don't mind that being posted on the internet, I will be happy to regress you over Skype and get you that information. I'm sure inside of you that information exists, because when I regress you to the event, in your mind, you're really there. So they can actually, I don't know how this works because it really doesn't make much sense to me, but I suspect that if they want to tell you who they are, when I regress you, they will tell you if they want to. Now, I'm not saying they do want to, but if they did, they could tell you who they are. Like it's like you're actually there, and they're there, and I have a feeling you can pick that information up from them or just have it available to you either way. And if it doesn't work, then at least you'll have a clear understanding of what they look like in your mind, as opposed to a vague idea of what they look like. And if you've got a very clear understanding of what they look like, then you can draw them out, or you can go to like a police artist or somebody you know who's artistically inclined, and you can describe them and have them draw them out. And then when we meet again over Skype and sometime in the future, you can just show me that image, and I can go, oh, and I can flip to the book. If you don't ever buy and go, oh, that's these guys over here. You know. So anyway, we got a bunch of different ways we can figure this out. You just have to choose which path you want to take. So.
Well, Douglas was abducted when he was a child, and my ex-husband's father was an abductee as well.
Oh, stop. Who is Douglas? Current or past husband?
Oh, Douglas is my paperless husband, my boyfriend that I live with.
Oh.
He and his and a group of children in Burnsville, Minnesota, were abducted when they were about 9 years old.
How many kids?
I think he said there was about 7 or 8 at the bus stop one morning waiting for the bus. And he said that a silver disc it made no noise, but it floated up to the kids from the sky. And he said that he and the other kids couldn't talk, but that they were lifted off the ground. And he said they were quite a few inches off of the ground. And then the school bus came around the corner. And I think that's what startled the ETs. And he said that when that school bus came around the corner, they all went and dropped to the ground, and the disc shot away. And he said it was preceded by a really bright light in the sky, and everybody was looking up, and then they saw the disc coming down, and then all of them were lifted off of the ground. And I've asked him about it a few times, and he said, well, did you ever talk to those kids again? And he said, no, we all agreed we would never talk about it ever. So going into adulthood, none of them have ever spoken about it.
So does he believe he had missing time? Is he actually on board? Or
Yes.
Almost?
Yeah, he thinks he missed a few minutes, or what he perceived as a few minutes. You know, he was a kid, but it was just the timing of the bus is what led him to believe there was missing time.
So does he ever want to know who that was?
No. No. He's quite content with staying blissfully ignorant about the whole thing.
So he never saw the ETs themselves. He only saw the craft.
Right. And then he said they just all went weightless and started floating up. And they all fell to the ground quite unceremoniously when the bus came around the corner.
But he believes he was taken on board.
Yeah.
But he was only gone for a few minutes.
Yeah. What he calculated was a few minutes.
Okay. And he doesn't fear them, or how does he feel about them?
He has a great respect for them. He doesn't have any desire to be taken again. And he doesn't know why they would have chosen him and that particular group of kids. That reminds me, as I'm talking, I'm remembering things. A couple of weeks ago, we had a time thing happen here and you're probably the one that could probably help me answer it. There was all kinds of noise going on in the house, and I got up and I looked at the clock, and it said 3:34 a.m. And Douglas woke up when I got up, and he said, "What are you doing? What's all that noise?" I said, "I don't know. I'm going to go out in the living room and see what's going on." And he said, "What time is it?" And I said, "It's 3:34 a.m." And he goes, "Okay." And he goes back to sleep. And the dog and I go outside the door, and we start walking down the hall, and the dog stops. She won't go only halfway down the hall. She refused to follow me out into the living room. I go out in the living room. I can't see anything out of place. And there was all kinds of noise. I checked the doors. All the doors were closed and locked. Everything was fine. And the dog, I tried to get the dog to come into the living room or go outside. She wanted nothing to do with it, wanted nothing to do with me. She turned around and went back to bed. So I turned around. When I went to go back to bed, Douglas, he said, "What was all the noise?" I said, "I don't know." And he said, "Well, what time is it again?" And I said, "Well, now it was 3:43 a.m. And we fell back to sleep, and we slept. It was going into like a Saturday or Sunday morning, so we didn't have the clock set for work. And I went to sleep, and when I woke up again, it was still dark out, and it was still early, and I looked at the clock, and the clock said it was 2:38 a.m. And I cannot figure out how I would have woken up about an hour and a half earlier, and it's 3:34 a.m. And then I go back to bed, and I wake up an hour later, and it's going on and it, and all I can think of is it was some kind of time shift or something. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know what it was that happened.
Well, maybe both of you were abducted, and instead of bringing you back to the proper time, they brought you back an hour early.
I'd love to know why they would choose the people they do.
Oh, that's easy. They choose any number of people for any number of reasons. There's tons of different reasons for different people. So some people it's genetics. It's they want to take. Okay, so I had one client I've only had one client as a hypnotist who was an abductee, and they took her because they wanted her genetics. They took a sperm from one of them and an egg from somebody, one of them, I guess, or one of us, I don't know. They took a sperm and an egg combination, put them together, and I think, okay, I know what they did. They took an egg out of her, and then took one of their sperms and put it with her egg, then stuck it back in her, and then took her around the world a few times and did other people until the egg and sperm combination attached to the wall inside of her where a baby would begin, whatever that's called, and to that wall where it's safe. And then they put her back in her bed and let it grow for 10 weeks until they could take it out again. And they took it away, and it could be grown by now. So that's a being that's a combination of us and them. So they're merging the two races together. That's one of the reasons that there are many races creating many different types of hybrids, and some of them are grays, and then there are many others. There's reptilians and all kinds of others, and I'm not really an authority on the subject. I can just tell you what my one client was. She was used as a breeder for the grays, and she figured that she had 55 offspring. She had been taken, she'd had 72 encounters, 24 implantations, 24 checkups, and 24 removals. For a total of 72 encounters. That's 48 abductions and 24 encounters that were not abductions. They were just checkups. And so at the 10-week mark, they remove it and they take it up to their ship and incubate and continue with it in another space until it grows up. So that's a breeding process. And in her case, they took her because of the fact that, well, what she said they took her was because she was very psychic. She claims that that before she was born, she would, after she was conceived, but before she was born, she would be out of her body, hovering astrally above her parents' bed, right above their pillow, like 10 foot above their head, and looking down at them. She's in the womb, but she's astral projecting above the heads of her parents. And she said she never lost that talent to be able to astral project. And when she said that she had the talent to be able to see through walls, see through people's body, and see their bones, and she had all kinds of super psychic talent, and they wanted that talent. So they took her because of her genetics, because they wanted that psychic talent. So that's a breeding program of one race and one reason for getting one human. Now, the next human they take could be for a totally different reason. Same race, same reasons breeding, but different reason for the particular person. So, and then there's all the other races. There could be 20, 30, 50 different races abducting people at this time, and every one of them's probably got a totally different reason. And I can't tell you what all the reasons are for all these different races. I can only tell you the reasons for the one race and what the reasons were for the one client or one abductee. So that's a reason. Don't blow that out into that's the reason. That's just one of many reasons. Okay, so a lot of them come just because they're curious about us and they want to investigate us, and some of them are scientists and they're just investigating humans, and there are probably if you've got 100 different races visiting Earth, there's probably 100 different reasons for them visiting Earth, different reasons, and none of them being the same. And so every one of those races has probably got a unique reason for visiting us. And what could be interesting is that you could have different sets of ETs within the same race with different reasons for abducting. You know, it's like Jeffrey Dahmer versus Mother Mary. One's a murderer and the other's a saint. They're both humans, right? So you say, are humans evil? Yes. Are humans divine? Yes. They're both. And, you know, you could say the same thing about any individual race in the whole universe. Are they divine? Yes. Are they evil? Well, you know, people go along stepping on ants because we think ants are nothing. Well, the race that was taking my one client, she said that they looked at us like cattle, and that we're nothing more than cattle. And so we're lucky they're not dissecting us, but they need us for. Okay, let me give you another piece of information. So she was first taken when she was 9, and she was injected with a hormone that caused her sexuality to bloom before its time, so that she could be implanted early. Okay, but before that happened, she said she was in a room, and she said these astral demons appeared in the room. They just like materialized right in front of her, and they started coming at her like they were going to kill her or attack her. And she said this invisible barrier was in the room, and they were like bouncing off this string trying to get to her, and they couldn't touch her because there was an invisible barrier blocking them from getting to her. And what I'm believing, logically speaking, is that the Greys created the barrier because they knew they wanted this girl, and they didn't want these other beings to touch her. They were her girl, right? That they could breed with, 55 offspring, right? And they certainly didn't want these other creatures to touch her. Whether they were probably not very good creatures. They were probably worse than the Greys, but whatever they were, the Greys weren't going to allow them to touch her. And she called them astral demons. So if that description is accurate, that would mean that they're beings of a malevolent nature that came from the astral plane, which is the next plane beyond this one. So if you hear people astral traveling, you hear people say, well, I got out of my body, I went across town, I went into this apartment of my buddy, and I woke him up, and he saw me there, and when I called him later, he said, yeah, I saw you in my room, what were you doing there? And he gave them the information, their friend, that yes, they had astral traveled into this guy's apartment or house or whatever, and in this experience, what they end up doing is they describe that what was odd was the door of their friend's house wasn't quite the way they remembered it. It was different. And they'll describe a few details here and there about the world, which is different from reality. So what they're doing is they're traveling through the astral plane, not the physical plane, and then going back into the physical plane and going into their buddy's house and waking them up. But the reason why the details are different, some of the details, is because the astral plane is just a memory of this plane that you're creating in your mind. So that's all it is it's a memory of the physical plane that you recreate mentally. And so I used to do interviews from different people, and there was this one guy that lived directly above me, and I interviewed him, and he was being abducted by aliens, and he said that he'd be falling asleep, and the alien, the Gray or whatever it was, would grab his foot and would drag him out of the bed and down the hallway, and he could feel the wind and everything, like he was physically being dragged down the hallway. And for all he knows, he was being physically dragged down the hallway, right? And he said his brother had the same dream. He called it a dream, right? He didn't even believe it was real. He rationalized it as a dream. And he said it would happen as he was falling asleep. And the odd thing about the whole story was his brother had the exact same dream, except in his brother's dream, his brother was watching him being dragged down the hallway. You get my drift, right?
Yep.
Okay. All right. But this was happening when he got between the awake and the sleep state. Now, do you understand how dreaming works?
Yep, I do.
You understand that it's not when you go into the REM state. It is instead halfway between wake and asleep, going in, and halfway between awake and asleep, coming out. That's when it starts and that's when it ends. You're half awake when you're dreaming. And people don't, no, our doctors don't even tell this to people. The common man has no clue that this is the fact. They think of, it's when you're in REM, right? No, it's when you're half asleep, going in, and half asleep, coming out. So when you're in that state, halfway between awake and asleep, you're open to a world that is very strange. It's I don't know how to describe it. All I know is it's part of the hypnagogic or hypnopompic state. It's a reality that exists between awake and asleep. And I have never heard anybody describe it, what it is. It's the astral plane or the causal plane or the mental plane, or it's X, Y, or Z. I've never heard of anybody describe it in any fashion. But I've experienced it. So do you know how dreams manifest inside your mind when you're falling asleep? Have you ever watched a dream start before it actually became a dream? Do you know what I'm talking about? You're in your mind, you're in your head, right? And your dream is about to begin. And what's happening is you see it like it's a little bitty window, like a little square. It's not very well defined, but it's floating around in your head, and you might, if you keep going deeper, you might flow right into it, right? And it becomes the dream, right? But when you first see it, it's not covering your whole body, because that means you're already in the dream. It's just coming at you, and it's there as a small little window. And I've seen that, I've been in that space many times, and that's really the hypnagogic state. But if you, um, I can't even remember how I did it, but there's a state where you're right in the middle between the two, and you can see this other world. And it's not really like, it's not like plain as anything. It's very barely there. You can't really describe it or anything because you're not awake enough to remember it. But it's very strange. And I can tell you all kinds of things about things that happened to me in between awake and asleep. It's just a very odd space that people go through every day. And now people are afraid of, I was afraid of hypnosis when before I got hypnotized, before somebody tried to hypnotize me the first time. I was very afraid of it. I thought, well, you go to sleep and they have control over you, and they can like take you away and do things to you, and make you do this or whatever. You're not going to remember this and that. You have all these false ideas about hypnosis. I had those same fears and false ideas that everybody else has, and they're all false. They're not all real. When I got into a place where I was learning, uh, I went to a guy up in Conroe, north of Houston, and we went to his house, and he would take us into a trance, or try to, as a group, over and over and over all day long as part of the process. And I never felt like I was ever hypnotized the whole time for 8 months, right? And then I took 3 extra classes, or 7 months. I took 3 extra classes that weren't part of his normal base learning class. And on the very 10th, the last class I went to, we're doing this all day Saturday and all day Sunday, 1 weekend per month for 10 months. And on the very last weekend of the 10th month, I finally get to be the subject of where he's trying to just hypnotize just me, not the group. It was the first time. And I'm like the whole time thinking I was never hypnotized the whole 10 months, right? I'm denying ever being in a trance. And that's the way I was thinking in that moment when he was doing it. But after I got just a little bit into it, into a very light trance, the people sitting in front of me the students started individually giving me positive affirmations. And as they were doing that, a big, huge tear came out of my eye and rolled down my cheek. And I've cried, like, as an adult, like twice. Once at my father's funeral and once after 911. As an adult, I've only cried twice in my whole life after the age of 18. And so I knew this big tear meant that I was in an altered state of consciousness. At that moment, I had to admit to myself that I was in a trance. But I couldn't even tell, even then, when I knew I was in a trance, I couldn't tell the difference between that state and the normal state. And that's what hypnosis is really all about. When somebody puts you into a trance, even if you go what you think is, or what they feel is fairly deep, you're still really not that deep. You're just barely in there. And you really don't notice the difference. Now, I have taken clients down all the way to the coma state, where you're literally in the same state as when you go into a coma. When a person in a hospital or an accident goes into a coma, I can take you into that same mind state, all the way into the coma state. And that is a very different state of mind. But there's really very little reason to go into that state unless you really want to go far back and far forward in your timeline. in a normal medium deep trance, you can go 3 or 4 lives in the front future and 3 or 4 lives in the past. If you go all the way down to the coma state, you can go anywhere in your timeline, all the way back to the beginning and all the way to the end. You can go anywhere. And that's the big advantage to go that deep. I've only taken one person that deep, and he had already been in the coma state prior to me taking him into the coma state, so he was easy. But all I'm trying to say is a few things just to give you some information. But so we're at the time limit, but I'm willing to go as far as you want to go. I do want to ask you one last thing because it benefits you, and that is, as a medium, give the audience some kind of idea of what kind of topics you help people with, so that anybody watching this video can go, oh, I have that problem. I'll call her for that problem and get you some more business. What kind of problems have you dealt with as a medium?
As a psychic medium, people typically ask me to contact dead rallies. They will ask to have seances to contact, the spirit realm. They oftentimes will come to me because they're having, any kind of number of personal issues. They have questions about their job or a relationship, and they want psychic advice. So it's a crapshoot. We do our paranormal investigations and we do our haunted house consultations. Those are typically issues where families or people are being menaced and they're calling us to find out what's going on, and if it's paranormal, to remove the problem. And we do that most often, but we offer classes and readings and we do all kinds of crazy stuff. So we're a non-judgmental platform, and we welcome all to comment on our work or reach us about our work. I have oracles, crystal balls and tarot cards and runes and all the bells and whistles that most psychic mediums that perform seances have, but I don't use them typically. I don't need them. I prefer just going with the channeling, going into a meditative state and let the spirits come through me.
So do you have a particular being that you channel other than the relatives of the deceased, of the client? Do you have any particular being or beings that you tend to channel?
Well, I don't have a specific entity or ethereal. If they're called upon or they want to talk to me, they'll reach out. I know that I have channeled ethereals, which for our purposes, ethereals are any kind of a being like angelic, demonic, poltergeist, anything that's not the spirit of a dead person. ETs would be considered an ethereal in our world. And I know that on at least 2 occasions I have channeled beings that were not dead humans. They, I believe, were angelic in their state. One called himself Melchior, and another one called himself Haniel, but he said to call him Steve. So we call him Steve. And he actually hangs around my paranormal intern quite a bit. His energy is very, very intense and powerful. And he's not a force to screw with. We respect him very much, and he says he is here for the purposes of teaching, and he appears in the form of David Koresh because he came into our world in that timeline, and he wanted me to know that it was at the time of the Waco crisis that he walked out of his dimension into ours, so to speak, at that time. And so when I see him, he looks like David Koresh. But he's really very, very strong, very, very powerful being. but most definitely angelic. He's not. He's never been a human at any point in time.
So what kind of classes do you teach?
Well, we teach people how to use oracles, pendulums, Ouija boards, tarot cards, that kind of thing. We'll give basic classes on how to use those and how to use them safely, because a lot of the clients that I have that are being attacked and menaced, it's because they started with a Ouija board or a pendulum or something, and they misused it or didn't know how to use it correctly, and they misread the information and thought that they were talking to, their Aunt Trudy, when actually they were talking to something really dangerous. I've had documented cases of clients who were put in emergency rooms with broken bones, lacerations, black eyes, all kinds of crazy stuff, because when you deal with ethereal energy, which in lay terms is pretty much what people would identify as an angel or a demon, but they're kind of the same thing. They can be very powerful and very dangerous if they're not if they're not identified readily. And we teach people how to stay safe around spiritual energy, and we help people with finding their spiritual way. There's a lot of people that they're not satisfied with the standard cookie cutter religions, and they know there's something else out there. They need some more guidance as to where to look for their spiritual enlightenment. So we dabble in a little bit of everything. We have a Q&A class where folks can come together and they can write down their questions, and then they can just rapid fire questions at us, and we'll ask them questions, and if they have anything that they'd like to talk about, their psychic experiences, how to develop your abilities, we can do that for people as well. So kind of just an open door for people that have any paranormal issues or questions that they would like addressed, or if they want anything, like a good old-fashioned seance. Those are crazy fun and usually very revealing for the clients.
So all your prices are on your website?
Yes, actually, we believe that it's immoral to charge for the haunted house investigation, so those are free. We never charge anybody for that, but we do accept gratuities, and I've got a lot of beautiful gifts that people have made for me. People give us gratuities at usually at the end. We don't expect it, but we don't charge for that. Our seances and our readings and seances and things, I charge only $45 an hour, which sounds almost unfairly low. But again, I don't believe in price gouging people for this kind of work, because that's not why psychics have these abilities. Our classes, we do ask $100 for the class, and that would run roughly 90 minutes. We don't really stick to an alarm clock and tell people, okay, well, that's it, we're gone. We don't do that, and we do require that the classes be 3 people or more.
So for $300, you have a 90-minute class for 3 people.
We'll charge $100 for an hour, but we usually go about 90 minutes. So, and if they want to give us a gratuity on top of that, they're welcome to do that. We just require that they just have to know that the class will be a minimum of 1 hour, and that's $100, and a minimum of 3 people or more.
So it's $100 per person, right?
No, $100 per class.
Oh, okay. So you have 3 people that get together and they split for $33 a piece. They get to have a class.
Yep.
Okay. And how do the people pay you?
I have PayPal, which is linked to our official website. And if it's an in-person thing, people typically pay with cash. I've gotten checks before, but if people want to give us a gratuity or they're paying a fee for a reading, you can put it on the PayPal. I have Square as well, but my PayPal account is the most often used for me.
So how did you get Square, and how does that work for you?
The Square I almost never use. It's basically the same thing as PayPal Business Pay. The format's pretty much the same. You can manually enter cards or swipe them. You get a little swiper.
Okay, so all right. Well, I think we're pretty much done. Um, I had a lot more questions, but your time is up according to what you wanted to do. If you want to continue, that's up to you. I would love to know more about your paranormal and dead people experiences, but I mean, honestly, you've had a whole lifetime of experiences. You could literally talk for hours. And
That's why I started the podcast. It was a way to tell my stories and what it's like to live a life where you can sit down and talk to the dead just like you do a regular person or see them. I've had a lot of really incredible experiences, and I wanted to record them somehow and kind of have them out there.
so, is there anything you want to tell the audience before we finish, or anything that you feel that is in the back of your mind that you think the audience should know before we stop? I mean, this is your last chance to say just anything, self promo or whatever you want to say. I mean, it's any, if you meet this type of ghost, don't do this. Literally anything you want to say that you think would help the audience or help yourself. Either way, you're more than willing to. I'm not going to limit you. Whatever you want to say, that's your business.
I think I would like to let the audience know that you're not crazy, that there's definitely something going on. Paranormal teams like mine will go in and determine what it is that's going on. But that you're not crazy. Don't judge yourself and don't be afraid. There is really no reason to be afraid of the dead. I guess my most important message is to always keep in mind that spirits were once human beings that were loved. They made a difference in the world. They were valid. They had families. They were parents and sisters and siblings and children, and they need to be treated with the utmost respect as you would treat a human being. And never to shout at them or swear at them or say that you hate them. Just respect them like you would a human being, because they really are still a human being until they leave. And I find a lot of people are very, very disrespectful to the dead.
And give all your contact information, all of it, one last time for the audience.
The quickest, easiest way to get a hold of us here in the great state of Minnesota, we are located in the Twin Cities, and we can be reached at 952-855-8887.
All righty, and you give us your website one last time.
Oh, we're at PIAC, Minnesota Paranormal. If you Google us, it'll take you right to our Google page. We have quite a few pages, but our official website is under PIAC, Minnesota Paranormal.
All right. Anything else you want to say?
Well, thank you so much for taking the time, and we'll have to do another session at some point.
Well, we can either, on the next session, we can either talk about your experiences with ethereals as opposed to ETs, and that's probably just as, if not more experience, they're more interesting than the ET stuff. I'm betting that it's at least as interesting, if not more interesting.
It can be a little weird, but yeah.
Well, let's either focus on that or Anything else that you feel is interesting that the audience, we want to make the show as interesting as possible. And if you like, there was one last question I thought about asking you, and that is, you have your media manual podcast, and I saw the different recordings there. If you had, if you told your audience that they could only listen to, or they should only listen to one, instead of saying, well, listen to all of them, obviously, because they're all good. Is there one particular episode that you think would, if audience wanted to get hooked on your podcast, which episode should they check out that would be the most interesting, that would get them hooked on the rest of the podcast? Is there one that you think you went over stuff that was more interesting than any other?
Well, I ran a little ongoing series last year called the Haunted House Ghost Stories, and it was podcast episodes that were about all of the different haunted houses that I've lived in my life. And I got a lot of positive response from that. People would send me notes and say, "Hey, when are you putting out your next haunted house?" Or "Thank you for that last episode. I was riveted. I loved it. I listened to it again." And so I know people were very, very interested in the haunted house series that I ran. I ran another limited series called Fakes, Frauds, and Charlatans, and I think it's real important for people. I don't pull punches with some famous alleged psychics and frauds and charlatans out there. And I think that people need to be aware of uh, how they can get hoodwinked by people, because there are unfortunately a lot of people that base their psychic abilities off of their ego, and they can be very greedy. So I think it's good for people to know where we stand as a paranormal team, and that uh, we don't relate ourselves to a lot of the mainstream nonsense that goes on.
So,
But the first podcast, The Maiden Voyage, tells a bit about why I did the podcast and why I chose to do it. And
have you seen the TV show The Dead Files?
oh yeah, yeah, I watch it a lot. She's actually someone that I respect very much, because I mean there's a little bit of dialogue and pattern to their drama. They have the big reveal at the end. But she's been studied extensively by universities, governments all over the world. She has been documented and verified. Um, I would have to say that she's probably every bit as powerful as Edgar Casey was in his time for our time. But her work is very, it's killing her, and it's taking a toll on her life. It's very difficult when you communicate with the dead and you walk on that other side of the veil. It causes a lot of health problems, and a lot of life just isn't the same. And even though you can turn it off and on, especially in her case because of her show, she's under a lot of pressure to perform. And she's still performing with Matt, who's her ex-husband, and they're still working together. So she's under an enormous amount of pressure, but I respect and admire her because she is so accurate, and she has been studied and documented and proven and vetted time and time again um, by organizations, universities, doctors, governments, and you can't get any better than that for vetting. So.
Well, I quote her in my book. I talk about many different things that happen in this world, and war is there was an episode they were in I think it was in Texas, but it could have been anywhere in the Southwest, and the land had a lot of Indian war, between the different tribes on that land. And there was a conversation between her and Diaz Chavi, her retired police detective. I have a hard time remembering how to pronounce his last name. But there's a conversation she has with him during the reveal, and I quote that in my book about, what was in that one show. So I thought she was very good also. I'm glad to see that you respect her as well. So.
I do, and she's probably the only living one now that I do. Edgar Casey, Jane Roberts is a mentor to me and someone who I looked at to learn from. And her and Seth, they began their relationship quite out of the blue. She wasn't intending to do it. It wasn't something that she looked for. And she's passed now, and of course Casey has passed. My dear friend Bev is someone I admire and respect too. But Amy is probably, as far as famous or infamous psychics go, she's the bomb. I love her. I just love her and her work. She's very cool.
Very good. Any last words?
Just be kind to ghosts.
Okay, I'm gonna stop recording. Here we go.